in 49ers faithful Juju Talk Sports, Jose Corral, 49 Reasons to Listen, 2 right here. So hit that subscribe button, guys. Brand new documentary out, one that required me to get a Peacock subscription, one thing I did not imagine myself ever doing in my adult life. But here we are. And considering how lazy I am, probably going to stay on my credit card bill. But nonetheless, had to do it because the documentary surrounding Joe Montana, Under Pressure, had to give that one a watch. Very important, must watch viewing for any 49ers fan out there. Jose, right out the gate, what was your favorite part of the documentary? What's something that you were interested to learn more about?
For me, it was right from the beginning. We obviously know Joe Montana is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Going in through the 80s, he dominated the 80s with Jerry Rice and Bill Walsh. They created one of the best dynasties that this league has ever seen. But, you know, us being in our mid to late 20s, we never got to see that, right? And we only really knew him as a 49er great. I liked the beginning of his come up, of his bring up of him, being a multi-sport athlete in high school, where he was deciding if he wanted to play basketball. He was even a pitcher in baseball, but he ultimately decided to go to Notre Dame. The trials and tribulations that he had to go through when he was at South Bend, that he really had to, I think that really made, Joe Montana a great Niner quarterback in the future, was all that just pressure that he had in Notre Dame. He wasn't getting the chances of being the starting quarterback, and he just prevailed and eventually just proved to everybody and everyone around the country. He won a national title with Notre Dame. I think that was the most interesting thing because we obviously know everything that he did with the Niners, but, we don't really hear that much of what he did with Notre Dame. Well, he accomplished a lot. He gave him a national title, and, it wasn't pretty from the beginning. And I thought that was interesting because I didn't know that. I didn't know that he was going through these starting quarterback battles at Notre Dame, and that there was a pretty big chance that there was actually a good chance that he never would ever become an NFL quarterback. But the fact that he stuck with it and eventually became, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, to me, that was the most interesting thing, just to come up from his younger ages and going through college football and then eventually becoming one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time.
It makes you think, what can you learn on the practice field versus what you can see in the game? Because Joe Montana even described himself as a gamer, not a great practice quarterback, and having to come from being the 7th string quarterback on the roster at Notre Dame, I also found fascinating. But I'm going to go in a different direction from you as far as my favorite part. It had to be the Young versus Montana stuff, because it is so improbable in today's game. We would never see a quarterback of Steve Young's talents sit behind another quarterback for 5-6 seasons. It's incredible that they were able to keep him around, get him to buy in that he was the next man up behind Montana. Of course, they kept feeding him, hey, Montana's back's going to give out any time now. Montana's legs are going to give out any time now. Did you see him take that concussion, that big hit against the Giants? He's done, Steve. I'm telling you, he's done after this year. Even Bill Walsh just feeding him that little nuggets every now and then of playing time, the quarterback drama, the quarterback controversy, and the fact that it still lingers to this day. I know that Young and Montana are in a very cordial relationship at this time in history, but the fact that Joe even said during the documentary, yeah, they ended up winning a Super Bowl, but if I stayed, they probably win 2 Super Bowls. Just tells you that he still has that little bit of dog in him, that little bit of spite in him. And I found that to be the most fascinating part, because again, in today's game, in today's microwave culture where everything happens in a season or less, just look at what we're dealing with all this Trey Lance stuff. People wanted Trey Lance in the field. There's no way in hell Trey Lance would be the backup quarterback for another 3 years, whether it's behind Jimmy Garoppolo, Aaron Rodgers, or hell, even Tom Brady himself. That would just not happen in today's game, especially with stuff like the franchise tag, the rookie wage scale, hard to relate to in some instances. And I think that's why it was an important watch for someone like you and I, coming from the millennial generation. And Lord help us when we get into generation XYZ. But as far as millennials go, we got to grow up with the JT O'Sullivans, the Nick Mullins, the Troy Smiths, the Alex Smiths, the Sean Hills, the Ken Dorsey, the what's his name, Dilfer. I can't even remember what Dilfer.
Trent Dilfer.
Why can't I? Yeah, doesn't matter. But This is just the long list of bad quarterbacks the Niners have had in our lifetimes. So you have a little bit of a different feel for when you hear about guys like Montana, when you hear about guys like Young, and to have it presented to you in the way this documentary did, I feel is a good reminder to tell us of where we were and where we can only aspire to get back to.
No, yeah, I'm right there with you. That Steve Young and Joe Montana stuff that was going on. It's kind of crazy how it's kind of been. That's kind of like a Niners trend when it comes to its star quarterbacks that we've seen, over the past couple of decades. But yeah, you bring up a good point. The fact that even during that time when Joe Montana, whenever they brought in Steve Young and Joe Montana was still technically the starter, but he knew they had basically hired his replacement. He was playing with that pressure. He was still Joe Cool. He was still calm under pressure, and he still delivered and was still a high level quarterback until the day that he left to Kansas City. I think that just really embraces what Joe Montana really was and what he brought to this franchise, not just the franchise, but the league in general. Until then, you hadn't really seen a quarterback like that, a quarterback that had to go through all of that throughout his career, literally from the beginning all the way to the end with the team that, drafted him and the team that was, where he intended to play his entire career. The fact that he was able to stay cool under pressure for a decade plus just kind of embodies what Joe Montana was. And this documentary, I think, brought out that part of Joe Montana very, very well. I think that the title Under Pressure was perfect because the whole theme of it was him just staying cool under any situation that he was in. And I thought this documentary did an absolutely phenomenal job of bringing that out.
Is it funny to relate Under Pressure was riffed by Vanilla Ice into Ice Ice Baby, and Joe Montana's nickname is Joe Cool?
That's not a coincidence, right?
Just bringing it full circle here. A lot of musical factoids in this documentary. Like, do you like Huey Lewis and the News? Because in '87, you released his most accomplished album, 4. And the undisputed masterpiece, of course, is Hip to Be Square, a song so catchy that Joe Montana and the rest of the 49ers had to hop on the backup vocals for it.
Yeah, I mean, that was really, that was the Niners in the 80s. The Niners weren't only just the king of the 80s in football. They were really the kings of the 80s in pop culture, which is another thing that this documentary kept on bringing up, especially towards the beginning. They even mentioned it. Anytime you turn on the TV or you read a newspaper, Joe Montana's face was on there. And that just really, that was really what Joe Montana was, especially in the 80s and during his dominant run with the Niners and those 4 Super Bowls that he won. It was just basically it's basically what we see of Tom Brady today, right? Everyone that grew up in the 80s, hell, Tom Brady himself, looked up to Joe Montana. I think this documentary brought that out. I mean, they did a really good job of taking us millennials that weren't there, taking us back for us to really understand what Joe Montana was. Especially, for Niners fans, if you're a millennial that hasn't watched a Niners fan that's a millennial that hasn't watched this documentary, the Peacock subscription was only like $5, so it's honestly worth the $5. Even
30-day free trial, 30-day free trial if you do it right.
If you do it right, you do get those free 30 days. After that, you don't even have to watch anything else. Because I honestly do not plan on watching any other Peacock material after I watch this. So
what are we doing? We're shilling out to NBC here, telling them go get the app, go get the app. Well, damn it, NBC, you had to go put the Montana documentary as an exclusive. You son of a bitch! You talked me into it. What was your favorite fun fact?
My favorite fun fact, I would have to say his neighbors, whenever the relationship he had with like the neighbor when he was growing up, that like the fact that they didn't have a big yard, so all the kids and including him would go to the neighbor's yard just because they had the biggest yard and they would just kind of toss the football around. I think that was it. And the fact that he was embodied so greatly in the community that he grew up, they really basically followed him all the way through from the Notre Dame days all the way to his pro days in San Francisco. I've always found that fascinating about any player, where they grew up and what kind of upbringing they came with and the town that they grew up in. So I thought the relationship with this town was probably the coolest thing for me.
The Huey Lewis in the News one was honestly my favorite fun fact, but I'll throw out another. I subliminally knew this, but I don't think I really knew this, was that the only reason the Rudy game happened was because Joe Montana was inactive. So we wouldn't have the movie Rudy if it wasn't for Joe Montana. Joe Montana is the reason we have Rudy. He sings backup vocals. He loves fat bottom girls. He's a 4-time Super Bowl champion, 3-time Super Bowl MVP, and apparently really good at basketball too. Some more stuff that I learned about Joe that I never thought I would know, but thankfully we got to see it. Again, we got to relate to a quarterback that we never got to see play live. Maybe one day we'll get a VR kind of system that allows us to look back in history, pretend we're Tom Brady in the stands at the famous catch game, or Joe Montana's last game as a 49er. Also seeing that 49er versus Chiefs game when Montana went against Young, you know, Montana had to be feeling really good that day. Probably felt as good as honestly winning the Super Bowl to him.
Probably. Yeah. That's the ultimate, like, you know, you should have kept me. And then, you know, who, you know, we never really know what would have happened if they would have, you know, stuck with Joe Montana those years. You know, maybe we do win an extra one, but for what it's worth, I'm also a huge Steve Young fan. So the fact that we were able to have 2 generational quarterbacks just makes it even better for me.
All right, 49ers fans, if you have seen the documentary, give us a letter grade of what you thought it ranked for you. Drop below in the comments, just in general, your thoughts. What was some fun facts you learned? Because we learned a lot of fun facts. I'm sure you learned a lot of fun facts. Maybe we forgot a few. There's a lot. There's a lot in just this short documentary. So I am 100% sure we missed some. Leave a like on this video, helps out the channel. And of course, we need you to help out the channel because we want to talk a lot more Niners content. And we especially want to talk a lot more Niners content heading into 2023 when we officially get our franchise quarterback. Is it Tom Brady? Is it Trey Lance? Guess we'll discuss on a future episode. Let us know. 49 Reasons to Listen, Juju Talk Sports, Jose Corral, 2 right here. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and we will see you next time.